Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Today we are back at it with another Star Wars Armada video. We're going to be talking about the Interdictor Combat Refit for Star Wars Armada. This is the most untaken version of the Interdictor, maybe the least taken ship in the entire game of Star Wars Armada. I want to talk about the combat refit a little bit and what makes this ship so undesirable and how it could potentially be better. So we'll do a little bit of a history lesson here and kind of compare it to the other ship. Also, if you guys are new here, there's still time left to enter to win that $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you have ever run this ship. Also, you can join our Discord if you want to check out some of the other links that are down there. The social media links are down there. If you want to get a t-shirt or check out Patreon or any of that stuff, all of those links are going to be down in the video description. So, with that being said, I'm also almost at 50,000 subscribers, so early next week, once I announce the winner for the current giveaway, I'll be announcing the next giveaway, and that one's going to be a special one. All right, so let's talk about the Interdictor Combat Refit. Now, this is a ship that almost nobody ever takes, but I actually used to like this ship a little bit when it first came out, and I thought about recently, why did I like this ship when it first came out, and now I definitely don't. Well, first, and to kind of clarify why it's so bad now, because a lot of new players will come into the game and they'll see this ship and they'll think, what a piece of junk. Why would I take this ship? And if you're either brand new to the game and unfamiliar with it, I'll kind of talk about why it is so bad. So the Interdictor Combat Refit, well, it's got 9 hull, it's got a brace, redirect, 2 contains, it's got 1 click at each of its speeds, whether it's speed 1 or speed 2. And it has 2 command, 2 squadron, 5 engineering, 2 red dice in the front, 2 blue dice in the front, 2 red and 2 blue on the sides, and 1 red and 2 blue in the rear. It's got 2 shields all around except an extra one in the front, so not that much shields, but it makes up for that with the hull. Of course, it's got officer, it has a support team, an offensive retrofit, an experimental retrofit, and the ion cannon upgrade at 93 points. Now, this is a medium ship with 9 hull, which isn't too bad, but not that many shields. Now, you're paying an awful lot for a ship that doesn't have very much firepower, it doesn't have very much in the way of shields, and doesn't have even the best upgrades. Now, what are you really paying for that 93 points? Well, right over here, that experimental retrofit. That's what you're really paying for, and that's one of the reasons why this ship is so undesirable, because the Interdictor suppression refit completely blows it out of the water in almost every category. For starters, the Interdictor suppression refit is cheaper at only 90 points. You're going to save 3 points. The second thing is it has a second experimental retrofit. Now, the Interdictor is the only ship in the game that can take an experimental retrofit. It's the only ship that has those available to them, and it's a great platform to employ some really cool new upgrades that are going to change the way the game works a little bit. You know, dropping gravity rifts, moving objectives around, setting ship speed to 0, very, very cool things. And it has a lot of great applications, whether you're running crazy objectives or you're trying to defend against somebody doing a hyperspace assault or Radis bombs, and now all of a sudden those ships have to deploy at speed 0. So it can do all kinds of super cool things. The Interdictor is it's just really cool because of the experimental retrofit. Make no mistake, the experimental retrofit is the reason that you take an Interdictor as opposed to something else. Most other medium ships or ships with similar offensive capability are a fraction of the price that the Interdictor is. The increase in points that you spend for this ship is there only for those experimental retrofits. The only other thing that makes the Interdictor kind of stand out is that it's got 5 engineering, so it can be pretty survivable with its 9 hull and 5 engineering, but it doesn't have the shields to really make that work, and it doesn't have a defensive retrofit to really make that work either. It's more anecdotal that it has 5 engineering rather than being kind of a hallmark or a selling point. So why did I initially like the Interdictor Combat Refit as opposed to having a second slot for the experimental retrofit? Well, part of that has to do with the time in which this ship first came out. There weren't a whole lot of Imperial ships to choose, and so at the time that this came out, I was still running Darth Vader as a commander very often. It was the kind of the Star Destroyer game for the Empire. You had Victory Star Destroyers, and you had the Imperial Star Destroyer, and the Empire's playstyle at that time was really all about making sure that your opponent was in your front arc. And then, of course, having TIE fighters try to gobble them up as well, and maybe the TIE bombers. There was definitely a lot of TIE bomber, Reimer ball shenanigans that were also going on. But for Imperial ships, they really lived or died based on whether or not they had you in their front arc. And so when I saw this ship for the first time, I said, well, hey, here's a ship that's, while it doesn't have quite the damage that an Imperial Star Destroyer has, it kind of makes up for that by having its side arcs are just as strong as its front. So I looked at this and I said, wait a second, here's a ship that can get 2 red dice on you from long range in the front, and then maybe double arc you and have 2 red from the side, and maybe an SSD has 4 red in the front, and they can, from long range, I'm thinking to myself, like, well, this ship could be just as good or just as threatening at long range. And that could be kind of cool. And sometimes it's better to have multiple shots, and sometimes it's better to have just a single shot. I also was never a really heavy squadron player, so I liked the extra flak die a little bit as well. But I looked at this and I said, this is one of the better side arc Imperial ships at the time, and so I looked at this and I thought I always favored red dice because I often would run Commander Vader for a lot of my Imperial ships, and I wanted to maximize the number of dice that I had in my attack pool and that I could reroll, and having more attacks at long range I thought was very, very helpful. And so the Interdictor Combat Refit was very early in the game of Armada, and it was and it caught my eye a little bit, and so I thought it was pretty cool. And granted, while the suppression refit at the time certainly had the better utility with the experimental retrofit, it had less firepower because blue dice, well, they weren't as good back then. And, having only the 1 red die meant that at long range, I might not have a shot at all. And I think that's another key here, is that the blocked attack. If this ship was in, behind something else or whatever, I might not even be able to take a shot at your ship, because if it's obstructed, I lose that red die, and then I have no attack pool at all. And so again, but this was like initial impressions when this ship first came out, and since then there have been a lot of other things to come out. So a lot of other upgrades. So first off, the Architans, another great ship that really gives the Empire some side arc capability. And ever since the Architans came out, I really haven't really cared about the Interdictor as much as a firepower option. Because I don't really need to worry about front arcs as much if I'm flying Architans, right? So basically the number of ships has grown tremendously since the Interdictor came out, and now it's not just, oh, here's another ship that has some slightly different profiles for its dice. We have a lot of different ships for the Empire now, and we don't necessarily need to use the combat refit just because it happens to have red dice on the side, So that's one takeaway. But the other thing is, we've had so many other upgrades come out that have changed the way ships use blue dice, and 2 of them that I'll note here, heavy ion emplacements and disposable capacitors, really lend themselves to make the Interdictor suppression refit superior to the combat refit, not just not just because it's cheaper, and not just because it has an extra experimental retrofit, but even for combat. This ship now has better offensive capability because it has more blue dice, so more of a chance of rolling that blue crit with the heavy ion emplacements, more blue dice that can be used at long range with something like disposable capacitors. There's probably only going to be one key round where you're firing at long range and needing to trigger heavy ion emplacements. On subsequent rounds, you'll probably be moving closer to each other and thus more likely be at medium range or even close range. So the red dice aren't going to help you at all. So I feel like there's been an emphasis and an increase on ion cannons upgrades. on blue dice mechanics, and all of those have been able to fit perfectly on the suppression refit. And at the end of the day, the combat refit kind of got left behind, and it's actually worse now. Now, granted, it's still got the better anti-squadron attack, and for things that specifically want red dice, it has that. But there's not very many things that do specifically want red dice, and some of the few that there are that do specifically want red dice, well, those come in the turbo laser variety, of which the Interdictor hath not. Okay, instead of my silly speak, basically the ship that kind of could benefit from turbo laser upgrades doesn't have the turbo laser slot. So how do we fix the Interdictor Combat Refit? Well, we don't do anything. AMG would have to do this. But this is a great opportunity for if they were to come up with a card pack or any errata like what is coming to certain other games. The Interdictor Combat Refit could easily, at a glance, you could look at this and say, well, this could easily benefit from a turbo laser upgrade. And that might be one of the first takeaways you might have by looking at this ship. But I wonder if that maybe, if we do that, is it really just another gunship? Like, don't we have enough of those between all the different Star Destroyers and the Victory Star Destroyers and the Architons? And, do we really just need another turbo laser red dice ship? I don't really think we do. So maybe the way that we kind of look at the Interdictor Combat Refit is from a different point of view, in that one thing I would consider would be lowering the points for the combat refit, and potentially even lowering the upgrades. Like maybe take off the ion cannon and the offensive retrofit, or one or maybe both, and basically make the combat refit a stripped down Interdictor. And thus it be, so it has less upgrades. It still has this dice profile, and so it still can throw respectable dice in combat. But it's got to rely on the commander or fleet-based or allied abilities to get rerolls and to get dice mitigation into play. So basically the idea that I have for the combat refit is that, yeah, you're only getting one experimental retrofit with it, but it'll be maybe cheaper, and you have no help for your dice, no help for your ship. It's basically you're running the experimental retrofit, officer, maybe one other upgrade, but basically a bare bones ship that has some average dice output, and it's kind of counting on your fleet to give you the rest. And so that would make it really kind of stand out, I think, from the suppression refit, and because all of a sudden now maybe this becomes the more expensive version, and by the way, you have all these other things that you can do, and if you wanted the combat refit, well, you're going to have, you're not going to really be able to modify those dice very much. And so, that's kind of the idea I'd have for it. I think it should be cheaper, especially if you're only getting one experimental retrofit. But who knows? Maybe they could do something completely different with it. The problem is I wouldn't want to do too many wild and crazy things, because every ship kind of has a little bit of a niche, and you don't really see too many ships that are kind of designed to run, I guess, naked. And this one wouldn't be a ship that you'd run naked either, because this would be one of those ships you take if you only maybe need one experimental retrofit. And because this was the prototype, so it's not as well designed as the production model, and so it only had one experimental retrofit, and they didn't even hook up all of the all the combat systems yet. So you're kind of firing blind. So you just got to hope that you naturally re-roll those roll those dice the way they need to be. But that's just one thought that I have. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. Maybe giving it and this would be an interesting one since it's going into combat. Maybe giving it a defensive retrofit would be something to consider. It would make it very hard to kill. And if you want to send it into combat, maybe the aspect of it being in combat is its combat survivability less than its combat firepower. It would make for a very capable flagship with 9 hull, 5 engineering, and a defensive retrofit. That is possible, because there's also that support team option on there too. So there's a lot of very interesting things you can do with a defensive retrofit and a support team on a survivable ship. But I don't have all the answers. I just have some ideas. I'd love to hear what you guys think. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Stay tuned. We'll have more coming at you every day. Don't forget Double Critical on most Sunday nights. I will be talking to you guys soon. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are absolutely amazing and help make this channel possible. And always remember, don't ever go out into space with only a space suit and no oxygen tank. You need that oxygen tank too. Otherwise, you're just going to smell your own farts and eventually die with fart smell in your lungs.